Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming this evening. My name is Garnet Henderson. I am an independent journalist and the host and producer of Access, a podcast about abortion.
And my name is Lisa Battisfor, and I am the founder and president of Reproductive Transparency Now. And we are a Chicago-based nonprofit that focuses on raising public awareness of crisis pregnancy centers through not only events like this, but also through community organizing and peaceful demonstrations. We're here tonight to take an in-depth look at crisis pregnancy centers, or CPCs. CPCs are also known as pregnancy care centers, pregnancy resource centers, or my favorite term, fake clinic. CPCs are anti-abortion organizations, usually not-for-profits, that aim to intercept pregnant people who are seeking abortion care. They are able to create barriers to abortion access through well-documented, but far too often underestimated deceptive tactics. Although they usually present as small faith-based organizations, CPCs are part of a large and very sophisticated network that is coordinated by umbrella organizations such as Heartbeat International, CareNet, and Birthright International. Their large scale lends them a significant amount of power and influence, the dangers of which we're going to dive into much more deeply tonight.
Today, April 7th, is the day that the Senate confirmed our first ever Black woman Supreme Court Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson. It is also World Health Day, and next week is Sexually Transmitted Disease Awareness Week. And it was those two things that really inspired the timing of this event, because in addition to spreading misinformation about abortion, crisis pregnancy centers are increasingly offering limited medical services, including testing for sexually transmitted infections. And the CDC, which organizes STD Awareness Week, actually includes some crisis pregnancy centers in its directory of STI testing service centers.
What does it mean for people every day who are living their lives and are dealing with these places and these conflicting messages? And so I am so excited and so honored to be able to introduce our next two speakers. So first we have Aimee Registe, Esquire, who is a reproductive justice lawyer based in Northern Virginia and is the policy and advocacy program manager at SisterLove, Inc. Aimee's work centers on sexual health, reproductive rights, and reproductive justice through state, local, and federal policy and advocacy work with a focus on maternal health, reproductive justice, LGBTQ plus liberation, and disability justice. And we also have Dázon Dixon Diallo, who is the founder and president of SisterLove, Inc., the first women's HIV, sexual and reproductive justice organization in the southeastern United States. Dázon is a recognized visionary and advocate in the struggle for human rights, sexual and reproductive justice, and the fight against HIV with and on behalf of communities of women and girls living with HIV and those at risk for HIV and STIs. She's a proud member of In Our Own Voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda Partnership, a co-chair for Act Now and AIDS National Coalition, a UNFPA Global Advisory Council member, and a founding member of Sister Song Reproductive Justice Collective. Thank you both for being here, and I will let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Dázon, I believe you're muted.
Yep. I thought I hit the mute button, but you know, I'm in that space. So I'm here now, but thank you so much, Lisa, for that fabulous introduction. And hey, Aimee, how you doing?
I'm good, Dázon. How are you?
I'm good. I have to say it like that because we're in different cities. So we have to act like we're like from Long Island. I'm really grateful for this conversation. I know that we have a list of questions and things that we want to get to. But I think first, and you've heard a bit about SisterLove, but I think it's important that we express to folks that SisterLove roots, everything that we do is rooted in the reproductive justice framework, which of course has its grounding in the human rights framework, as well as using intersectionality as an approach to everything that we do. And so this issue is of immediate concern because they too now have entered into an intersectional space that we weren't seeing in the early days. For example, when I used to work in an abortion clinic here in Atlanta, the Feminist Women's Health Center, back in the 80s. And so it's of deep concern to us. And we want to make sure that not only in this conversation, but in everyday conversation, people are able to talk about these facilities and the people that are in them and who they are, who run them. And so I think that that's another piece, is that they're not only very difficult to find or to at least identify and recognize, but who the people are who are working in them are also difficult to know about, where they're coming from, what their backgrounds are, what they're doing. When most often, when you enter any space that's a legitimate provider of any kind of sexual and reproductive health services, the people who work there are pretty open about who they are, what they think, where their information is coming from. So I think that is also a part of our concern. The other thing, because Lisa talked about this being a community approach, and there was a question in the Q&A that I think we can answer, is that in addition to the location of these CPCs being nearer or in near vicinity to abortion facilities where they can find them, they also at the same time are also locating in communities that are low income, have less development, have fewer resources, fewer opportunities, even for those who intend to sustain their pregnancies and give birth. So the issue here is that one of the biggest impacts from the question on Black, Brown, femmes and girls is that they target us. So I think that that's really the biggest issue there, is that they target us and then they exploit us because of the issues and the needs that we have, and because they can use a broken health system to reach us. So that's my intro into one of the conversations, Aimee, which is why these facilities and what they do is so harmful, especially to communities of Black and Brown women, femmes, girls, and other people who are assigned female at birth.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you, Dázon. Everything that you said kind of segues into this conversation about why they are so harmful. So crisis pregnancy centers promote themselves as non-biased medical clinics, which they kind of present themselves as they're going to offer you unbiased information and support. And that's not the case. Most of them are not medically licensed. They tend to have untrained staff. As was discussed earlier, they dress in scrubs or medical garb to convince people that they are a legitimate healthcare facility. And they operate to discourage the people that they see, from seeking out abortion by telling them false information. And as you said earlier, they tend to target people of color, lower income communities. They tend to be in these locations, knowing that these are the people who are most vulnerable. And a lot of the false information that they give usually asserts a link between abortion and breast cancer, or abortion and mental health issues. It's also common for these clinics to give pregnant folks false information about how far along they are, in order to decrease the window of time that is available for them to access actual abortion services. And one of the issues that SisterLove is particularly interested in, because we are an organization that advocates for HIV and people living with HIV, is the fact that these oftentimes these CPCs claim to provide STI testing and counseling, but a lot of them are ill-equipped to do so and just simply don't provide the testing that they claim to offer.
Yep. I mean, when it's at the outset, what upsets me the most is that they are legally, because of the Supreme Court decision, the California case, they are legally sanctioned to lie. And that's what people don't really understand, because there's no, signage that says these people lie, but it's okay. Um, so that's one, is that they are consistent liars, that they are atrocious liars, because everything they say can be disproven. All you have to do is just question them. The other thing that just what Malia's story brought up for me is that, in addition to the misinformation and the fear mongering that goes on, is that they're actually re-traumatizing people because of their inability to be trauma informed, their inability to even care about people's traumas, because their intent is to traumatize people away from choosing abortion. And that in and of itself is not only anti-feminist, it's anti-woman, and it's anti-mother, as far as I'm concerned. They're also costing people a lot more money. So when we talk about the economy of reproductive health, the economy of a choice around pregnancy, where it, on the one hand, looks like the choice for pregnancy is long, or continuing a pregnancy is as long as we provide you some resources at this moment, at this outset, you'll be fine, without the concept of the lies. If I end up getting an abortion, still cost me money, a lot more resources and relationships in some instances, but also the fact that the abortions themselves are safer, especially for Black women in the United States, that the abortion services in this country are safer than carrying a pregnancy to full term. That kind of stuff, I think, is even more dangerous, and why they're harmful. And people who are usually seeking these services in the point of needing not just a pregnancy test, but a place that's going to help affirm, or at least confirm, what their needs are, what their choices are. I like the way our scientists have placed it, is that they put the needs of the CPC goals over the needs of the people. So they're not people-centered, they're not human rights centered, they're not woman-centered, and they're obviously not, they have an alert allergy with the truth. And I'll just keep saying that they are liars. They are big, fat liars. And they also take advantage of the most vulnerable moments for people. So they're not just giving out fear, they're just like driving shame and driving guilt and driving stigma in ways that are quite damaging in the long term, especially if we're talking about younger adults, if we're talking about teenagers that are seeking these. I am deeply concerned about some of the folks that we come across as very young people who actually have been through some of the same traumas that Malia has expressed. The other thing that comes to me, Aimee, that I think is important in terms of some of these issues, and we can talk about what's happening, is that the funding that goes to these centers are often, as the Andrea and Danielle have showed us, are in places where they have not expanded Medicaid, are in places where the access to reproductive health services are shrinking, not expanding. And that they're also, more than likely, other than Medicaid funding, they're not funding HIV prevention, they're not funding STI prevention. In the South, for instance, most of all of those funds come directly from the federal government, not from the state governments. But the state governments are those that are directly funding CPCs. So they have to be, I think at one point, I don't even know what the amount is now, we not only, for example, in the state of Georgia, do we have a license, a vanity license plate that you can buy that is anti-abortion, anti-choice, but those funds also are used to go directly to the CPCs. So there's already a system that's set up. But let me talk about a piece that I think is even more alarming, especially since we're in a dangerous election season. And that is, and it's already been spoken to just a little bit, but they are now big data mining centers. They're big data mining centers for the anti-abortion factions, and by extension, the conservative electoral system, right? So they're not just collect. That's why I would say to folks, if I was counseling someone in person, if you are find yourself in one of these places, might not have even known you were there, but if you find yourself in one of these places, just know that they're going to be lying to you. So I don't think you should feel any obligation to be honest with them. Not your name, not your address, not your phone number, not your birthday, nobody's information that's connected to you, because all of that information will be used not only against you, but any and everybody else through the policies that they're able to profligate with that type of ability and capacity. That is a serious issue that I don't hear being taken up in media spaces around how this technology, the world of technology, is creating more opportunities for them to violate people's privacy, violate people's human rights in ways that the law can't yet keep up with. So that's an even bigger piece that's an even bigger piece that I think we have yet to wrap our heads around. And the other part that I think is important is for us to talk about some of the things that we're doing. What are you all working on over there in the policy and advocacy program?
Yes, thank you so much.
In other words, back to you, Aimee.
Thank you, Dázon. So in the policy and advocacy space at SisterLove, we are working with a group of other organizations trying to defund CPCs in Georgia. So we are investigating CPCs and trying to interrupt their funds. As Dázon mentioned earlier, CPCs in Georgia in particular receive funding from the government. That this funding should be going to actual healthcare providers, actual healthcare facilities. And so we are trying our best to divert those funds from them to actual healthcare clinics that would provide necessary healthcare to people, including abortions. So we are we're looking to the 2023 legislative session and trying to get legislators to introduce, pass, and implement a policy that would repeal the existing funding in Georgia. In terms of SisterLove and following us and the work that we're doing, we really need people who are, willing to follow us on our socials and who are willing to donate to us. And so all proceeds go towards advocating for sexual health and reproductive justice. We were up until Monday of this week putting out fires by organizing folks to go to the Capitol to advocate against an anti-abortion bill that was introduced in Georgia. And we were instrumental in making sure that anti-medication abortion bill did not pass. So currently, our department is working on, as I mentioned earlier, the defunding CPCs work and looking forward to advocacy opportunities for the upcoming elections in Georgia. And that's, based off of the department that I'm in, but also our research department is working on a project that has to do with access to medication abortion. We have also partnered up with Emory's Center for Reproductive Health Research in the Southeast to conduct mixed method research on medication abortion in Georgia. And so all of the donations or the proceeds would really help us to continue doing this necessary work. And yeah.
Yeah, no, I also think that there's some work in front of us to do, because we are basically the same folks that we serve are now the folks that they're capturing. And we have some cross purposes, right? And so there are other things that we need to be doing to make sure that we're engaging the people we serve who are seeking us out for STI screenings, for HIV, and then pregnancy. We're not the first place people come to for pregnancy screening, but we are among the first places, especially women and their families come to for HIV and STI screening. And so there are a couple of things that I think about in terms of what they're doing, but I also want to think about other strategies going forward. First and foremost, I'm in absolute agreement with Andrea. I think if we're paying taxes The CDC should not be, and nobody else. And I think that we should direct it to HHS just to make sure that there are no other agencies, including CMMS or CMS, Medicaid, Medicare programming, anywhere that's providing referrals to any of these facilities. That has to be a number one thing. But I also think we need a much better, broader messaging and information campaign, because people just don't know. Using some of the signs, what to look out for, how the language that they use, the imagery that they use. I love this notification that, they have biblical imagery everywhere. That's, red flag number one. But messaging and giving people sort of what Malia is providing to our audience now in terms of what the TFUN campaign is offering communities as fact sheets. So the defund issue, removing from the CDC list, a much more robust information campaign that is viral if we can make it so. But I also, because they are preparing for a post-Roe environment, right? And they're going to actually get more traffic and more traction in that era. And so I think in this instance, we also need to be planning for very much similarly, but in ways that are much more supportive and loving of the people seeking services, that our protests outside and within their vicinities, that the demonstrations need to be right in front of their places where we're actually helping people, not necessarily attacking people as they do. And I'm not against looking forward to the litigation that needs to be coming forward about the dangers of them providing or fake providing STI and HIV services without providing treatment and referrals. In the state of Georgia, because we are one of the we go neck and neck between, New York and Georgia being number one in terms of Black maternal mortality, but that is also directly connected to when and where people are able to get their prenatal services if they are carrying pregnancies, right? So in addition to the issue around abortion, the stigmas around HIV and how they are exacerbating these issues are also quite dangerous. In the state of Georgia, by law, a provider of services, especially health services to pregnant people, have to do HIV screening at least once by the third trimester. So if that's not happening, then there may be cause in here. And so I really think that there are ways for us to look at this from a legal standpoint of how they are actually a bigger part of the HIV epidemic as a problem versus a solution. It's unacceptable to believe that they would be sending people out the door with HIV when the first rule of HIV is the minute you find that someone is tested positive, they must be linked to care immediately so that they can get started on their treatment and hopefully sustain viral suppression or reach viral suppression and sustain it. So this has huge implications in terms of how they're encroaching in the sexual health space that I don't think the HIV or the STI community has even begun to wrap its head around. And that speaks back to this whole issue, why reproductive justice approach to this is so important, because those intersections cannot continue to be ignored by the different sectors of our public health community.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with everything that you had to say, in particular, relating to the stigma associated with STIs and how they are, further perpetuating that because they are allowing people to get tested and then not linking them to care, but also the fact that they, a lot of these centers tend to preach abstinence only or discourage people from using condoms, or as Andrea and Danielle earlier spoke about, talking negatively about use of condoms and how it's not going to prevent the spread of STIs. So I think it's, doing a really bad disservice to the sexual health movement and to sexual health advocacy in general, that CPCs are allowed to continue perpetuating that.
Yeah. And we can open it up for questions because you and I could talk about this stuff forever. So, but we can offer it up. what I would say is that for people who are receiving these STI type services, the most important thing to look for, the most important thing to recognize in a really good program is that you're the center of attention, that what you can get is confidential information, that you can get it for free, that you will get not only referrals, but that you will actually probably have access to some type of treatment or a provider. That if it could, like what SisterLove does with our program, which makes us unique, is we are feminist centered, we are people centered, we want to know your lived experience. We don't talk about what's wrong with your sex life. So we're not going to talk about what risks you have, how many partners you had, whether you know what their status is. We are going to make sure that whatever your sexual and reproductive health desires and aspirations are, that we have the tools and the services that you need to make sure that they are the best and that you have the optimum outcome that you are seeking without having to inquire about what's wrong with your sexual life or with your reproductive decision making. That we value people's own stories and their own decisions, and we demonstrate that value by listening to them and by responding to them based on their stories.
Thank you.
So I don't know, Lisa or Garnett, if y'all have questions, or Aimee, if you have any more comments.
We have all kinds of questions in the Q&A, so there's no way we'll get to all of them, but definitely want to make sure that we potentially address a couple of them now. So we got a question from one of our attendees saying that I see some CPCs state that they comply with HIPAA and are confidential sources, yet they share ultrasounds and client stories on social media and don't seem to have permission. How is this legal and how do we report it?
So that's a really good question. I would think first and foremost, from a HIPAA standpoint, it has to be because they're also not licensed. I don't think they have to have CLIA waivers. I don't think they have to do any of that kind of stuff because they claim that they will pretend to be one thing, but when it comes to the authorities, they totally and immediately claim that they're none of those things, right? And so they're not beholden. So I would think that we have to start in terms of querying the legal practice of violating HIPAA, is that the person who has been violated with a HIPAA situation actually has to be the first person to initiate any kind of complaint. So that's the first thing, is we have to educate people to make sure that if you haven't signed a HIPAA consent form, but they're taking your information, you're already you're putting yourself at risk for that. And if they provide you with a HIPAA, any kind of consent form, and then they're still sharing your information or your data or your details, then you should have grounds to take action with them legally. Now, from a collective standpoint, I think that it's a matter of making sure we're getting as much data, as many stories and experiences as possible, so that we can actually take that as I'm not going to say class action, but to take that as an overall class effect, that there are many people whose confidentiality and medical data has been breached, and that it's enough people that you don't have to wait for individuals to file suit. So that would be two things that I would think about. Encourage people to make sure that their HIPAA protections are in place and that they pursue them when they're not, and that we collect as much information as possible on how many people know that they've been violated, so that we could at some point have legal grounds to go after all of it.
Yeah.
And another question we got here from an attendee anonymously is, how can youth engage in this movement?
Aimee, I'm gonna throw that one to you because you're the youth, but also I want to apologize for answering the legal question when I got my lawyer sitting here. I'm so sorry for doing that.
No, you did an amazing job. So
we've been, as the person who has to make sure we implement HIPAA at SisterLove, I had a feeling, I had a sense about that. But what about the young people?
Yes. So the young people can join us on our social media, following us. They can reach out to me personally. I'll make sure that my email is provided. But essentially, they can just join us when we have organizing days, when we go to the Capitol, in order to talk to legislators about these issues. Going forward with the defund CPCs work, we are going to need as many hands on deck as possible. So we definitely want to appeal to the youth and have a youth presence, because this affects them as well.
I want to offer another one. With our Healthy Love Youth Advocates Network,
That's
periodically,
true. Yeah.
what we would do is actually do some secret shopper stuff. So because they're all young people, they're in high school, they're in college, and so they're all college age folks or high school aged, and they take one person's pregnant urine and they go into these places and they present themselves as clients, and they're collecting data while they're doing that. They're marking what's been said. In some, we've had a couple of people actually record. I know that's not legal in the state of Georgia. We didn't use any of that data, but they recorded it for themselves to show proof that they have been there. But I think that that is an amazing and important subversive strategy. If we want to see how it actually happens, we need people who are conscious like Malia and who are pregnant and who can go, or who have pregnant pee and can go in and collect the information that we need to use for opposition research.
Yeah, I just want to add, for sure, like we definitely, we have our Healthy Love Youth Advocates program at SisterLove. So if you are interested in that, please check out our website. We need youth to be interested and to participate.
So I'm going to ask one last question and then we'll move into closing, but I think this one really gets to the heart of why we're all here. And that question is, what do you think is the end goal for the anti-abortion movement? What are they trying to achieve?
You know, I'm not sure they know. I'm not sure, because first and foremost, I could give you what we know in terms of what the opposition presents to us. And I don't think we can rest anymore with the nebulous notion that it's about controlling people's bodies and futures. I think there are some underlying issues that are very geopolitical that we have to address. I think, and for example, most of the people who are in this movement, most of the people who lead this fight, most of the people who are pushing this legislation are old, crusty white men who will not ever have an opportunity to be pregnant or be a parent, a single parent who had to push something out of their bodies. And so, and their population is dwindling every year. And in about 20 years, they will no longer be the majority in this country. And so the advent of contraception, the advent of birth control, the advent of abortion that has allowed women to enter the workplace, that has allowed women more options, more power, more economic independence, is a threat to the patriarchy. It is a threat to white supremacy. And so by, in one instance, making sure that BIPOC people stay in their places, with having economic challenges, with having communities that are continuing to be less resourced, with making sure that they suppress our vote, that all of these things are all wrapped up in the issue of power and privilege. And the fact that white women are having fewer children, just like everybody else, and are moving and succeeding in the workplace and are achieving things that were shut out for them prior to the advent of contraception and abortion, are also a threat to these men and these people. And so that, I think, is one of the core reasons. The other one is people actually believe in it. People actually believe that abortion in one way or another is murder because of their own faith, because of their own cultural backgrounds or their own religions or their own influences by their families and their heritage. I don't think they have any other means other than that somebody told them it was wrong and they believe it too. They don't have an end goal other than to stop people from doing something that they think is wrong. The problem for me in that is that is extremely myopic and narcissistic, because just because you believe something doesn't mean everybody has to believe the way you do. And what white supremacy tells them is that we have the right to tell you what to do. And you don't have to be white to be complicit with white supremacy. All you have to do is be complicit with the system and the structure. And that's what we have in the anti-abortion faction.
Thank you so much. This was so moving, and I hope that everyone who's on with us really took a lot away from that.